Our first reader of the evening is an author of narrative nonfiction and has written for The Huffington Post, Smith, The Nervous Breakdown, Next Avenue, Natural Health, and Martha Stewart Living, among other publications. She is working on her second book, titled Invisible: How I Came to Accept the Extraordinary. Please welcome Suzanne Clores.
That's great. Hello. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So this is a story about the day I accepted a ride from the Brooklyn entrepreneur who I'll call Louis Bagels. But it's also about the idea that coincidences are not just coincidences, that you are an agent in your coincidence. And instead of ignoring it or attributing it to the universe, you might consider claiming your coincidence as part of your own extended mind in search of transformation. So let me explain. I used to think that all coincidences were the same. Random intersections of ideas, people bumping into each other at the same time in the same place. But then I started to look back at all of the uncanny incidents, and I noticed that some of them had something in common besides the coincidence itself. This unfamiliar force would sweep in and surround me, block out the world, bring information to light that I hadn't seen previously, and change my decision-making. And I'm convinced that it was this type of force that struck me that day. Louis Bagels rolled down the Cadillac window, smiled, and asked me to get in. And though it happened years ago, I can still feel the quality of that force surrounding me and reorienting how I thought and how I felt and my whole sense of time. A neuroscientist friend of mine calls this force physical evidence of extended mental capacity. And maybe after you hear this story, you will too. So it starts like any other day, on the street, walking to work. And by design, New York is one of those cities where everybody walks. All ages, all races, with canes and struts and swaggers and strollers. I had moved to the more pastoral Brooklyn in effort to get some distance from the Manhattan drama and get some quiet. Now these days, Brooklyn is the white-hot center of cool. But back when I lived there, my first-generation Italian neighborhood boasted clean stoops, blooming front yard gardens, and that's about it. So I remember the details very clearly. It was a rainy spring morning. There was a fresh scent of green leaves blooming with a mediocre bagel smell in the air. And I remember all of these details because I am certain of them. The rain, the green leaves, the mediocre bagels. They're all real and they're very mundane. I'm also certain about this. I was sitting eating breakfast on the third floor of my brownstone apartment, finishing the book Animal Dreams by Barbara Kingsolver, a coming-of-age novel. And I was enamored with Kingsolver's desert, magic, sage-scented, mountainous world. I was 25 and an underemployed writer myself, and very aware that my neighborhood smelled like garlic and cigars. That it was a safe neighborhood, not for coyote and owl, but for extortionists and racketeers. And old people, like Mario, who lived next door to me. He was a retired longshoreman, and he drank wine in his basement all day. And then there was Cliff, who lived across the street, stood in the yard day after day, waiting for action. White hair combed back, leather jacket expertly oiled. This was my community, and frankly, I wanted more. I wanted magic. And in fact, when I walked to work that day, I even remember saying aloud, "There's no magic in my life," to no one. And the words felt both true and pointless. Joseph Campbell would call this type of cry a call to adventure, which is much nicer than what I would call it, which is whiny. But still, I shuffled to the train, past the mediocre bagel shop, which always had this driveway full of fancy cars. Blue BMW, black Mercedes, creme brulee Eldorado. And as a city person, I never really registered cars. Didn't register make or color, but these I noticed because they never moved, and they were slightly menacing, like gargoyles on top of a rooftop. But this day, as I'm walking by, the creme brulee Cadillac backs up, stops on the sidewalk in front of me. The window rolls down, and inside there's this old guy smiling at me like we know each other. "How you doing?" he says. So he's not a total stranger. Like Mario and Cliff, I'd seen this man a fair bit around the neighborhood. In fact, his bullish presence always intimidated me every time I saw him, and he just seemed to pop up behind the counter of every store, like the convenience store and the paging device store, the tailor, the bagel store. And he always had his arms crossed in front of his belly, watching everybody work. And I didn't think of him as the friendliest of fellows. But this one day, actually about a month earlier, I saw him, and his presence really gave me pause. Because I was getting off the train close to where I worked in Lower Manhattan, and I saw him there. His familiar rack of shoulders leaned up against the Astor Place sculpture was unmistakable, as was his gray hair and teenager smile. And he saw me too. "Hey, miss, I know you from the neighborhood. Where you going?" I'm going to work." "You work here?" "Mm-hmm." It was a weird moment as we both took in each other's information, and I considered for a second maybe he was stalking me. But the bewilderment at being recognized by this small-time gangster person was very similar to the bewilderment that I felt while he's looking at me outside through the El Dorado window. "Hey, miss, you going to Astor Place?" "Yes." "Get in, I'll give you a ride." So ordinarily, I would not accept rides from strangers, especially this guy. But when I saw his face framed in the window, something happened. This soft chill surrounded me, and time seemed to stop. I didn't know what day it was, and all of my normal, ordinary constructs just sort of disappeared. All I saw was this man in his enormous car, and he looked at me like we were destined to connect. So with the little consciousness I had access to, I started splitting hairs between taking a risk and taking a chance. What was the difference? And what should I do? And I landed here. Taking a risk is a reckless decision based on desire. A chance, on the other hand, is based in the trust that the outcome will probably be okay if unexpected. So I'm feeling this urging around me saying, take a chance. And so I get into the car. So in the late 1800s, some of the earliest psychologists in the US and England started cataloging phantasms, physical, auditory, and hallucinatory forces outside of normal sensory activity. They call them supernormal invasions of the senses. And this is really the best explanation that I have for what happened to me that day, because once I got in the car and I started to smell the leather and the trace scent of cologne and the door lock snapped shut, I became aware of what I had just done, and now the panic is starting to rise. "I'm Louis," he says, and he extends this giant manicured paw, gold Rolex wrapped around his wrist. "I seen you that time in the city. I figured you'd probably want a ride, right? Isn't it nicer to get a ride?" We hit the river and we turn south, and my stomach lurches. We're going away from the Brooklyn Bridge. I expected to go north, not south to nowhere. But he's making small talk like there's nothing wrong. Where am I from? How long have I lived in Brooklyn? I can't stop looking out the window. We enter this ugly industrial spread of warehouses, and it occurs to me that we're probably not going to Astor Place. But I tell him I grew up in New Jersey and that I lived in Manhattan before I moved to Brooklyn. And then I lied and said that I really liked the neighborhood. And he saw right through me. "You don't like it." I said, no, I like it. I just, it's not what I'm used to. And he flicks on the windshield wipers and this dirty smear crosses the glass. I said, "Yeah, the neighborhood's changing. All the new people are moving in, people like you." And I really don't know what to say. And he starts laughing. "I'm just kidding. We like the new people. Me and my buddies. I'm going to tell you something now. We used to be wise guys. You know what I mean when I say wise guys?" And I say yes, because I've seen most of Goodfellas. And he goes, "Well, back then we all had social clubs. We took care of each other. We did this job, we did that job, we shared the tape. he's starting to get excited, and we're racing now onto this potholed highway that has signs for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and I have no idea what this is, but I really hope we're going to Manhattan. He starts giving me a history of the neighborhood and listing all of his friends. You know Scotto, who runs the funeral parlor? You know Esposito, who runs the butcher? And all these other people like him who, we never hurt nobody. I hear about stickball games and the late Jimmy Roselli, who was supposed to be as big as Sinatra, but he wouldn't play the game. And Louis looks at me with his glassy blue eyes. And it strikes me then how uncommon it is to have a trust between anyone in the urban experience. No one opens up their personal vault for no reason unless they want something equally valuable in return. So me and my buddies, we looked out for each other. We got things done, we made a little money. But we kept getting busted by the cops. We needed a place to go where no one would find us, like a clubhouse. So I find this storefront that nobody knows about. I rent it from a buddy who's not going to say anything. Where the bagel store is now. And I feel pretty good about it. But just to make sure, I get this sign made that says Cobble Hill Car Service, and I put it out front. And it looks pretty good. It looks like a car service. But then, just to make sure, I decided to take out a few phone lines. 1002, 1003, 1004. So now there's no way we're going to get busted because we got a phone bill and everything, right? So he's getting more and more excited, telling me this story in anticipation of his point. And he doesn't notice that he drives into the Easy Pass lane, and he has no Easy Pass. So he's leaning on the horn, blasting at the red light, demanding that it turns green. Of course it doesn't. He's getting more and more flustered, and I see the meaty arm go over the seat back, and now he's in reverse, trying to back up from the Easy Pass lane. But he's crushing these orange cones, and the buses and the trucks are honking at us angrily, and he's losing it. And finally, he steps on the gas and guns it through the toll without paying, and we shoot into the tunnel, into the fumes and the taillights. So this one Saturday night, we're playing cards. He's still telling the story. This one Saturday night, we're playing cards. And all of a sudden, the phone starts ringing. The fake phone, 1002. I didn't give nobody the number, so I don't pick it up. It keeps ringing, so someone's yelling at me. Pick it up, pick it up. I pick it up. It's some yuppie who wants a ride somewhere. So I hang up the phone, but they don't stop. Now it's 1003 and 1004. They're ringing constantly. The lights are flying on and off, and I'm getting pissed. I start screaming. I'm hanging up the phone, picking it up. I throw my cards down. I throw the chair across the room, and I'm like, I'm going to rip these phones out of the wall. My buddy holds his hand up, and he goes, no, you're not. You're going to get a car, you're going to hire a driver, and you're going to go pick those yuppies up and take them where they want to go. He looks at me now, and I'm totally enthralled. I'm like, so what happened? This little smile crosses his face, and he goes, I made a ton of money. I got totally rich. That was the beginning. I've got so many businesses now, the beeper store, the convenience store, the bagel store, even the fruit store. I can hardly keep up. So we shoot out of the tunnel now into Lower Manhattan. It's this gorgeous day in the financial district, which is impossible considering the rain in Brooklyn. But my panic is gone, because I know exactly why I got into this car with Louis Bagels. Listening to his transformation from small-time thug to financial mogul was not an accident. It was not a coincidence. This was the magic that I had asked for. So we get to Astor Place, and he drops me off, and I thank him profusely, both inside the car and when I get out of the car. Then he leans across the front seat, gets close to the passenger side window again, and I think, does he want to kiss? And I say, well, thanks again. And he goes, yeah, we'll do this every Tuesday. That's a little too much magic. Thank you.
Suzanne Clores. And you guys are awesome.
Thank you.